Okay? So I'm just going to start talking and telling you stories, and then whenever you're tired of me talking, you just say so. Okay? You won't hurt my feelings or anything like that. But it's my understanding, as Ms. Rickert said, that you're talking about human rights violations around the world, specifically around genocide, armed conflict, women's rights, child labor, poverty, environmental abuses, and modern slavery. Correct? Yeah? Okay. Well, for most of these topics, I got a story for you. And for some of them, more than one story. So, does anybody have a preference as to which topic we start with first? But don't pick genocide, because I haven't been involved in any genocide. Huh? Modern slavery. Okay, modern slavery. My very first overseas job was in Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia, it is one of the last remaining kingdoms in the world. It has a king and a royal family. And the country basically functions on what we call TCNs. Has anybody ever heard that term before? TCNs are, it's an abbreviation or an acronym for third country nationals. The TCNs were all the laborers that they would import from other countries. A TCN could be anybody from Filipina nurses to Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi workers. The Filipino males tended to have a higher order in the hierarchy of TCNs, so they tended to be what was referred to as houseboys or drivers of water trucks. Imagine in Saudi Arabia, it's the desert, the water is very valuable, so water trucks were a big deal. Okay. Now, mind you, many of the Filipino males who were driving trucks or acting as gate guards or working as houseboys, the people who would clean the houses, they often were college educated. I remember the guard at our compound, he spoke 4 languages. He was a professor of literature in the Philippines. However, he could make more money being a gate guard in Saudi Arabia than he could in his own home country. But the TCNs that people were really referring to were not the top of the hierarchy of imported workers, and we were imported workers too. The Bangladeshis, the Pakistani, the Indian workers, the ones who were outside working, who were doing all the road work, construction work, all that kind of stuff. Those were referred to as the TCNs. Now, their lives were what we would think of, or if you looked up a definition for slavery, this would match how their lives were. And this still goes on today. They were often brought in, and when you go into Saudi Arabia, your passport is taken away from you. You don't have access to it all the time. So these workers would come in, and oftentimes they were very uneducated. And they were from poor families, which is why they were going overseas. And oftentimes many of them would be sent overseas to work by their whole village. The whole village would get money together, and they would have to pay to go work. And then they would send their money back to the village to help support everybody there. They were housed in what we would think of as like a big dormitory, but it kind of reminds me of when you study the Holocaust in Nazi Germany and you see the concentration camps and you see the beds that are one on top of the other. That's the way their housing was. It was just one bed on top of the other. They were provided meals, but they would get 1 tin of usually rice, maybe some bread, some water. That's what they would get as their meals. And there, because again, it's the desert, it gets hot. The rule was if it ever hit 50 Celsius, then they did not have to work that day. Do you think it ever actually hit 50 Celsius? No. It would be 49, it would be 47 or 48, but the government would never report it as 50, even if it was 50. the government would never report it as 50. And so there they would be, out there, in, hotter than this, and it's not humid, but it's like oven hot. So it's still really, really hot. I'm sure you've seen pictures all covered up, trying to keep the sun off of them, and you would think that why would you cover up so much, because you were just going to be so much hotter. But they're also trying to keep their body moisture in, rather than it evaporating right away in that kind of heat, that when you sweat, it just evaporates so quickly, it dehydrates you even faster. So that's why they cover up and everything like that. So to us, that was kind of a modern form of slavery. And every morning and every evening, and they would work 15, 16 hours straight without any breaks. You would see them being picked up and taken home. They're just looking dog-tired. There were also many Sri Lankan women and Indian women who were there who would work as maids and nannies. One of the problems in Saudi Arabia at that time, they had so many TCNs in the country working, and especially within their individual homes, helping them raise their children, because at the time the population was 15 years and younger. So they had so many, for example, Sri Lankan women being nannies, that their own children were losing the ability to speak Arabic with their parents because they were spending so much time with the nannies. The nannies were often, again, imported. There had to be a male at the airport to claim them. And this kind of is a crossover between modern slavery and what I consider women's rights and the way women are treated. At the airport, if in the time that the nanny left her home country and arrived in Saudi Arabia, if that employer had changed his mind about employing her, then he just didn't show up at the airport. And if there was nobody there to claim her then, she could not leave the airport. Now again, remember, this is a poor person. So this person's stuck there. How are they going to get back? Who's going to pay for that plane ticket? And then what do while they're at the airport? Well, again, they had a room that unclaimed females were sent to this room, and it was, again, one bed stacked on top of the other, and they just had to stay there until somebody would claim them. And if they didn't know anybody, they didn't already have a friend working there or something like that, because that was the only way they would have access to food and water. Nobody in the country was going to feed them. Somebody had to bring them food and water. Same way in the jails. If you got arrested, somebody had to bring you food and water. They didn't provide that for you or anything. Clothes, change of clothes, anything like that. I myself, whenever I would travel without my husband, I would have to have a letter of written permission from my husband saying that it was okay for me to leave the country, and it would have the dates as to when I could leave and when I was supposed to be back. If he could not pick me up at the airport, there had to be somebody else, a male, had to be at the airport to claim me. Otherwise, I couldn't leave the airport either. And it's still like this today. For me personally in living there, and I lived there for 9 years,